A man and a woman who met for the first time on a blind date vanished near a quiet riverside town in 2011. Police said it was a mutual decision, two adults, who simply chose to disappear together. But there was no goodbye message, no financial trail, no confirmed sighting beyond that night. Then 7 years passed, until a local boat operator noticed something unnatural beneath the river's surface, a shape that didn't belong. When authorities pulled it free, they realized the blind date hadn't ended in romance. It had ended in something far more disturbing. The river was already darkening when they met, its surface catching the last scraps of orange light, like a held breath that hadn't yet been released. Neither of them had planned for anything dramatic that night. That was the strange part. To their friends, this was supposed to be safe, ordinary. A controlled experiment in loneliness relief. Two decent people, both single too long, both saying yes to a blind date because saying no felt worse. Ethan arrived first, standing outside the restaurant with his hands buried in his coat pockets, checking his phone even though there were no new messages. 32. Recently relocated. Recently divorced. When his coworker set him up, Ethan had laughed and said, "What's the worst that could happen?" But now, watching couples pass by the fogged windows inside, his smile felt brittle. A silver sedan pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out, smoothing her jacket, scanning the street. "You must be Ethan," she said, forcing a brightness into her voice. "Yeah, you're Lena?" She nodded. Blind date partners in crime. They laughed a small, necessary sound and went inside. The restaurant smelled like garlic and wine and overheated radiators. Their conversation started stiff, then slowly loosened. Lena talked about her job at the community center, how she liked helping people but hated the paperwork. Ethan admitted he'd been taking long evening walks, just to avoid the silence of his apartment. "You don't seem like someone who'd disappear," Lena said lightly, twirling her fork. Ethan smiled. "Funny, my ex said I faded. It wasn't a warning, just an observation." At the time, it meant nothing. By the time they paid the check, the street outside had emptied. The air had sharpened, carrying the metallic smell of cold water from the nearby river. Lena hesitated at the door. "I parked down by the bridge," she said. "It's a bit of a walk." Ethan shrugged. "I don't mind. Night's still young, right?" The river path was poorly lit, a string of tired street lamps casting uneven circles onto cracked pavement. Water moved quietly beside them, black and unreadable. Their footsteps echoed, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. For a while, they talked about harmless things. Movies they'd never finished, trips they wanted to take someday. But somewhere near the bend in the path, the mood shifted, not sharply, subtly, like a temperature change you feel before you can explain it. Lena slowed. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Sure. Why did you really agree to this date?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The river slid past them, indifferent. "Because," he said finally, "I didn't want to go home alone again." She nodded, but her face tightened. "That's honest. But it's also heavy for a first meeting." He stopped walking. "I didn't mean—" "I know," she cut in, softer now. "I just didn't expect that." A car passed on the road above, headlights briefly illuminating them, two strangers frozen mid-conversation, shadows stretching unnaturally long behind their feet. From across the river, a dog barked. Somewhere, metal clanged, maybe a loose sign, maybe something else. They stood there longer than either realized. At 10:47 p.m., a jogger passed them, later telling police he noticed the couple because they weren't walking anymore. They were facing each other. Close, not touching. The woman's arms were crossed. The man's hands were open, palms up, like he was explaining himself. That jogger would be the last confirmed person to see them alive. Minutes later, the river returned to silence. And whatever happened next, whether it was a step too close to the edge, a sudden decision, or something neither of them could take back, left no witnesses at all. By morning, two people who had met for the first time that night would be completely gone. The first thing anyone noticed was the quiet. Ethan didn't show up for work the next morning. No text. No late apology. No running behind. By 9:15 a.m., his supervisor was already annoyed. By 10:30, that annoyance turned into unease. Ethan was punctual to the point of obsession, a man who arrived early and left later than necessary, as if structure itself kept him upright. Lena didn't open the community center either. The light stayed off, The front door remained locked. Her coworker, Marisol, stood outside with a coffee growing cold in her hands, dialing Lena again and again. Straight to voicemail. "Something's wrong," Marisol said aloud, though no one was listening. By noon, 2 separate concern calls reached the local police station, unrelated, unconnected, filed under the dull category of adult welfare checks. Officers were dispatched, addresses were visited, doors were knocked. Ethan's apartment was untouched. Bed made, wallet on the dresser. His phone charger still plugged into the wall, cord neatly coiled like it expected its device to return. Lena's place told the same story. Purse on the kitchen counter. Coat missing. Her phone wasn't there either. At first, police assumed the simplest explanation. 2 adults met. They liked each other. They decided to keep going. Maybe they spent the night somewhere. Maybe they left town impulsively. When investigators realized the 2 missing people had been on a blind date together, the theory practically wrote itself. They ran off, one officer reportedly muttered. "Happens more than people think." Families disagreed. Ethan's sister, Rachel, sat rigidly across from a detective, her fingers clenched around a paper cup of water she hadn't touched. "My brother doesn't disappear," she said flatly. "He overthinks grocery lists. You're telling me he just vanished?" Lena's parents echoed the same disbelief. "She would have called," her mother insisted. "Even if she was angry. Especially if she was angry." By late afternoon, officers traced their last known movements to the Riverside restaurant. Surveillance footage confirmed them leaving together at 9:58 p.m., walking toward the path near the water. After that, nothing. No cameras. No traffic footage. No phone pings after Elavi, Tope. The river loomed large in every conversation, but no one wanted to say it out loud yet. A small search was organized unofficial at first. Family. Friends. Volunteers. They walked the path with flashlights, scanning bushes, calling names into the darkness like the night might answer back. Ethan. Lena. Their voices dissolved into the sound of moving water. Just before midnight, one of the volunteers, a college student named Ben, stopped near a bend in the trail. His light had caught something pale against the mud. A shoe. Women's. Flats. Scuffed at the toe. Dry. But close enough to the water to make everyone uneasy. Lena's mother recognized it instantly. She made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like the collapse of breath itself. Police cordoned off the area. Search dogs were brought in. The riverbank was combed inch by inch. Officers scanned the water with lights, beams slicing uselessly through the black surface. Still, no bodies surfaced. No ripples betrayed a struggle. No torn clothing. No blood. By morning, the official tone shifted. "This is being treated as a missing persons case," the chief announced. "There is no evidence of foul play at this time." But the river told a different story. Quiet, heavy, patient. Dive teams were requested but delayed due to poor visibility and strong undercurrents. When they finally entered the water days later, they searched only the shallow areas closest to the bank. Nothing turned up. Weeks passed, then months. Posters peeled from telephone poles. Media interest faded. The theory of a mutual disappearance hardened into something close to fact. 2 lonely people. 1 impulsive night. A decision no one else understood. But every night, Lena's father drove past the bridge anyway, slowing his car, staring at the water like it might blink first. Because deep down, everyone who stood by that river felt the same thing. Whatever had happened after midnight hadn't ended cleanly, and it hadn't ended far away. By the 3rd week, the river was no longer just a backdrop. It was the main suspect. Yellow tape fluttered along the path where Ethan and Lena had last been seen, its brightness clashing cruelly with the gray water below. News vans came and went. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, as if volume alone might disturb whatever secrets lay beneath the surface. Detective Harris stood at the edge of the bank, hands on his hips, staring down into the slow-moving current. "People think water gives answers," he said to no one in particular. "Most of the time, it just hides things." Dive teams finally returned with better equipment. This time they went deeper, farther from shore. The water was colder than expected, thick with silt that swallowed visibility after only a few feet. Divers moved by touch more than sight, hands brushing over rocks, branches, debris left behind by years of flooding. They found bicycles, shopping carts, a rusted safe. No bodies. The absence began to feel deliberate, as if the river itself was withholding something. Police pressure mounted. Families demanded answers. Community meetings grew tense, voices cracking under fluorescent lights. "You can't just stop looking," Lena's father said during one such meeting, his knuckles white against the podium. "People don't disappear into thin air." But budgets ran thin, leads dried up, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the case shifted categories from active investigation to open but inactive. That's when theories rushed in to fill the silence. One detective floated the idea of a double suicide. Two strangers bonding quickly. A shared despair. The river as a final choice. "There's no note," another officer countered. "Not everyone leaves one." Others suggested an accident, a slip, a fall, panic pulling the second person in after the first. It was neat, tragic, easy to file away. Then there were the darker whispers, an argument gone wrong. One pushed, one followed. Fear replacing reason. None of it could be proven. Rachel, Ethan's sister, refused to accept any version that ended with case closed. She called weekly, then daily. She kept a notebook filled with names, dates, unanswered questions. "You searched the river," she said over the phone one afternoon. "But did you search the story?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We searched what we could," Detective Harris replied. "That's not the same thing," Rachel said. Time moved forward anyway. Months turned into a year. A bench was installed near the path with a small plaque, in memory of Ethan Klein and Lena Morales. The word memory felt premature, almost insulting. Lena's mother stopped visiting the river after the first winter. "I can't keep imagining her cold," she whispered to Marisol one evening. "It's killing me twice." But Ethan's sister kept coming. She walked the path at different times of day, noting how the light changed, how shadows stretched near the bend where they'd been last seen. She talked to joggers, dog walkers, anyone who might remember something they hadn't realized mattered. Most didn't, until one man did. He was older, a retired maintenance worker who lived near the bridge. When Rachel showed him a photo, he frowned. "I remember that night," he said slowly, "because I heard something." "What kind of something?" Rachel asked, heart hammering. "A noise, like metal, heavy metal. Then a splash, but not the kind people make." Rachel relayed the conversation to police immediately. It was logged, filed, considered anecdotal. No follow-up came. Years passed like sediment settling at the bottom of water layer after layer, burying the sharp edges of grief beneath routine. New cases took priority. New officers rotated in, unfamiliar with the details. By year 5, even the media anniversary pieces stopped. But somewhere in the case file, buried under assumptions and unfinished searches, was a line that never quite sat right with Detective Harris. "River search incomplete due to depth limitations." He stared at it late one night, the office quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He thought about the shoe, the jogger, the way the river curved sharply just past the bridge, a place where currents slowed, where heavy things tended to settle. He closed the file, and told himself, like everyone else had learned to do, that if the river had wanted to give them answers, it would have done so by now. 7 years later, that assumption would prove painfully wrong. The river didn't look dangerous that morning. It slid past the docks with a lazy confidence, sunlight breaking across its surface in fractured silver lines. Fishermen had already packed up. Joggers moved along the path, unaware they were passing over a grave that had been waiting patiently beneath them for 7 years. Tom Alvarez had worked this stretch of water most of his adult life. He knew its moods. He knew where logs collected after storms, where trash drifted, where currents slowed just enough for heavy things to sink and stay. That was why the resistance felt wrong. His boat lurched slightly as the engine strained, a dull vibration shuddering up through the deck. Tom eased off the throttle, frowning. "Come on," he muttered, glancing back at the wake. Whatever he'd snagged wasn't floating debris. It didn't scrape or bounce. It held. Tom cut the engine and leaned over the side, peering into the water. At first, he saw nothing, just darkness, swallowing light. Then the shape emerged slowly, unnaturally straight, like a shadow refusing to dissolve. Metal. His stomach tightened. He radioed it in. Authorities arrived within the hour. Yellow tape returned to the riverbank, familiar and unwelcome. Divers suited up again, older now, some of them veterans who remembered the case from years earlier. When they went down this time, they followed the snag. The object was embedded in silt, angled slightly nose down. It took hours to free, mud releasing its grip reluctantly, as if offended at being disturbed. As the crane lifted, water poured from the interior in thick sheets. The crowd watching from behind the tape went silent, the realization dawning in stages. A car. When it broke the surface fully, gasps rippled outward. Algae clung to the windows. Rust bloomed along the seams. The license plate was unreadable, but the model wasn't. Silver sedan. Someone whispered Lena's name. Inside the vehicle, time had folded in on itself. Upholstery had decayed. Personal items floated and bumped gently against the glass like they'd been waiting for attention. The driver's door was locked. So was the passenger's. Investigators moved quickly, methodically, as if speed could soften the impact. Forensic teams documented everything before the doors were finally forced open. The smell hit first, stale, chemical, wrong. 2 sets of remains were inside. Lena was in the driver's seat. Ethan beside her. Seatbelts still fastened. The crowd was pushed back as families were notified. Rachel collapsed onto the grass when she heard. Lena's mother didn't cry at all. She just kept asking, how long? As if duration itself was the crime. 7 years. 7 winters. 7 summers. 7 birthdays missed. As investigators examined the vehicle, something unsettling emerged. The car wasn't near the edge of the path where a simple accident would make sense. It had entered the river farther upstream, at a point where barriers existed, barriers that should have stopped a vehicle cold. Except one section had been damaged long ago, bent inward, documented, never repaired. The river hadn't swallowed them whole. It had been fed. Then came the detail that quieted the entire command tent. The ignition was off. The gearshift was in neutral, and there were no signs of braking. Detective Harris, now gray at the temples, stared at the report in disbelief. If this was an accident, he said slowly, why didn't either of them try to get out? A diver added another piece, his voice low. There's something else. The windows. They weren't shattered. They were down. Not all the way, just enough to let water in. Enough to make survival possible if panic hadn't frozen it away. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the river darkened again, reclaiming its familiar look. But the truth had already surfaced, and it didn't bring relief. It brought a worse question, one that had waited 7 years to be asked. What actually happened inside that car? Before it ever touched the water? The car didn't lie, but it didn't tell the whole truth either. Under harsh white lights in the impound garage, the silver sedan looked smaller than it had underwater, stripped now of mystery and motion. Mud still clung to the undercarriage. Rust flaked off in thin, reddish curls. Investigators moved around it slowly, reverently, as if raising their voices might wake something that preferred to stay asleep. Detective Harris stood at the front bumper, arms folded. Start from the moment they leave the restaurant, he said. Nothing before that matters if we get this part wrong. The car had been parked legally near the bridge, exactly where Lena said she'd left it. Tire impressions matched the sedan. No evidence of another vehicle. No signs of a... Forensics reconstructed the timeline piece by piece. Chase. No defensive injuries on either body. This wasn't an ambush, the medical examiner confirmed. And it wasn't violent, but it also wasn't simple. Inside the car, the seating told a story. Lena's hands were found near the steering wheel, not gripping it, not slumped away. Ethan's posture was rigid, his shoulders slightly raised, as if bracing. The toxicology report came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol. So they were sober, Harris muttered, and aware. The windows became the focus next. They weren't fully lowered, just a few inches. Enough to let water pour in slowly. Enough to create panic without immediate unconsciousness. Enough time to react, but neither did. The seatbelts were still fastened. People don't stay buckled when they're drowning, one investigator said quietly. Unless they freeze, another replied. Accident reconstruction specialists examined the barrier upstream. The damaged section showed signs of age, not impact. The car hadn't smashed through at speed. It had rolled slowly down the embankment, guided more than driven. The ignition being off sealed it. "This car didn't go into the river on its own," Harris said. "Someone put it there." The room went quiet. Investigators returned to the blind date, replaying it now with colder eyes. The argument by the river. Ethan's confession about loneliness. Lena's discomfort. The pause. The tension. A theory formed fragile, but haunting. What if neither intended to die? What if the car was meant to scare, not to kill? Rachel listened as Harris laid it out months later, her hands trembling in her lap. "Picture this," he said gently. They argue. Emotions spike. Someone suggests sitting in the car to calm down. Maybe it's Lena, her car, her control. They drive a short distance, stop near the barrier. Rachel swallowed. And then? Then someone we don't know who puts the car in neutral. Maybe to prove a point, maybe to shock the other person into silence. A few feet. That's all it would have taken. But it doesn't stop. Rachel whispered. "No," Harris said. "It doesn't. Once gravity takes over, panic replaces reason. Windows crack open. Water rushes in faster than expected. Cold steals breath. The mind locks. And by the time they realize what's happening," Rachel said, tears sliding free, "it's already too late." There were no screams, no splashing. Just a car slipping into darkness, settling where the river was deepest, where early searches never reached. Not a suicide pact. Not murder. A mistake that required two people to live long enough to understand exactly what it had cost them. Lena's parents rejected the theory outright. "She was careful," her father said bitterly. "She didn't play games." Rachel wasn't sure what hurt more, believing it, or knowing she never could. The case was officially closed with the word accidental. Press releases used phrases like tragic misjudgment and unfortunate convergence of factors. None of it felt adequate. On the anniversary of the recovery, Rachel returned to the river alone. She stood where the bench still sat, plaque dulled by weather, and imagined the car rolling forward inch by inch, the moment where stopping was still possible. "Why didn't you open the door?" she whispered into the wind. The river, as always, didn't answer. Because the final truth of that night wasn't hidden in evidence or reports. It lived in a moment of panic, when two strangers realized together that some mistakes don't give you time to take them back. The river kept moving, long after the headlines stopped. By the time the final report was signed and filed, the town had already folded the story into its quiet mythology, something mentioned in low voices. Something new residents learned only after living there long enough. A blind date. A disappearance. A car found too late. Officially, the case was over. Emotionally, it never would be. Lena's parents packed up her apartment themselves. They worked in silence, touching things she'd touched, folding clothes she'd never wear again. Her mother paused often, holding ordinary objects too long, a mug, a notebook, a scarf, as if each one might still be warm. "She didn't even know him," she said once, not to anyone in particular. "That's what I can't forgive." Ethan's sister struggled differently. Rachel kept the case file on a shelf in her living room, its spine creased from rereading. She knew the findings by heart: the neutral gear, the ignition off, the windows cracked just enough. But at night, her mind rewrote the story anyway. She imagined Ethan reaching for the door handle. Imagined him saying Lena's name once, twice his voice swallowed by rising water. She imagined hesitation, that fatal human pause where disbelief steals precious seconds. The kind of pause that ends lives. The bench by the river was updated, the plaque replaced. This time, the wording changed. "In memory of two lives lost too soon." No assumptions, no explanations. Visitors left flowers sometimes. Notes too. Most were brief apologies from strangers. Prayers scribbled in shaking handwriting. One appeared every year on the anniversary, folded carefully and tucked beneath the plaque. "You didn't deserve this." No signature. Detective Harris retired not long after the case closed. On his last day, he took one final drive past the river. He parked near the bridge and sat in silence, engine off, windows cracked, then flinched, rolling them back up. He shook his head at himself. "It only takes a second," he murmured. The town eventually repaired the damaged barrier. Fresh steel gleamed where rust once bent inward. The fix was praised as proactive, responsible. Too late to matter. Sometimes, when the water is low, the river reveals its memory. Dark shapes beneath the surface. Twisted metal, things dropped, lost, forgotten. People stop and stare, wondering what else might still be down there waiting for the right angle of light. The blind date became a cautionary tale for some, a reminder for others. For most, it faded into background noise. But for the river, it was just another story it carried without judgment. Two strangers met hoping for connection. They found fear instead, and in a moment that was never meant to be permanent, they became inseparable. 7 years passed before the truth surfaced, not because it was hidden carefully, but because it was heavy enough to sink beyond reach. And that is what makes the story linger. Not the mystery of how they vanished, but the unbearable reality that nothing supernatural took them, just silence, cold water, and a single mistake that refused to let the night end.